Shabbat Shalom, you guys. Shabbat Shalom. We are out here on the river this morning. So what I wanted to really quickly say is that when you look at, actually, this was not a really quick one. This was supposed to be Theory of Everything 16. And so Theory of Everything 16, I really want to go into the understanding of the Bible. And so I want to get into Moses for the next video. And I want to get into Moses a little bit for this video. Moses almost needs 2 videos to discuss. But before we go into anything about Moses, just a quick recap of what we already have gone over. And not a recap in the traditional way, but more of a recap in understanding. So what we're looking at when we hold the Bible in our hands, this book that we believe to be true, that we know for a fact is true, what we look at with the Bible, and this goes to that understanding as well, is that belief goes beyond just, okay, I'm sitting down and I believe, but actually getting up and acting upon your beliefs. And I'm going to tell a story. I had a teacher, and when I was getting my associate's degree. And this teacher was a teacher of philosophy. So I thought automatically that when I signed up for this class, that I was going to run across an atheist who, would be teaching the philosophies of the classical atheists. And I was surprised because he ended up being a Christian. And what the class ended up being about was debate, the rules of debate, the levels of debate, and how to, it was a good class, how to persuasively and effectively structure an argument in order to get your point across. And he was, he used a lot of Christian themes in it. And of course, he couldn't do too many because it's a public school, but he did use a lot of Christian themes. And then didn't necessarily, he gave his point and his argument, and then challenged those who had an opposing argument to, by the structures of argumentation and philosophy, pose either a retort argument, or a competing idea. So, with all that being said, not losing topic, what he said is that people talk about faith, and I really, really loved this story, and I've kind of been telling it since then. People talk about faith, but really faith is the thing of action. And so what he said is that there was a artist, a trapeze artist, who wanted to walk a tightrope across Niagara Falls from one side to the other. And he's there, and he yells out, "Hey everybody, I've got this rope tied across Niagara Falls. Do you guys think that I can walk across it and not fall off?" And they said, "Oh, well, who are you?" "I'm a trapeze artist." "Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead." And he goes back, no problem, no sweat. Everybody claps. Yay, you did it. He said, "Do you guys think that I could go across the same rope, except this time I'm going to hold 10 bricks?" And he said, and they all said, "Well, yeah, that's a little bit more difficult. You can't really balance with 10 bricks, in your hand. 10 bricks is a lot of bricks." and it's heavy. And he said, I can do it. And they said, okay, well, yeah, give it a shot. And so he's got the bricks in his hand and across Niagara Falls on the trapeze, 1 foot at a time, no problem. They all, yeah, yeah. They scream, yeah, this guy's great. And the next thing he said is, do you believe that I can go across here with this wheelbarrow? I got this great big wheelbarrow. Do you believe I can run across and get back? No problem. And all the people are like, sure. Yeah, absolutely. We seen you do the bricks. We seen you do the yourself. It shouldn't be any problem for you to do it. Knock yourself out. I said, you all, he said, so you all believe, right? Every single one of you believe. Yeah, we believe you can do it. Go ahead. And he said, okay, one of you guys get in. Get in the wheelbarrow. Are you kidding me? How many people you think went in the wheelbarrow? None, right? None. Because they wanted him to do it. They knew he believed, and they believed that he believed, but they didn't believe enough that he could do it for them. He said those who have real faith would get in the wheelbarrow too. If you actually believe that he would do it, that he could do it, you get your butt in the wheelbarrow too. You see what I'm saying? Do you see what I'm saying? And so with this understanding, we look at the scripture. So you can't say you believe in the scripture. You can't say that you follow Yah. You can't say that you're a disciple of the Messiah if you're not willing to get out there in the mud and do the things that he did. If you're not willing to go forth and actually make a change. If you're sitting in a pew and you're doing the wrong thing. But I say all that to say this, that belief, and I got way off subject here, but belief is a thing that requires action. And so people in ancient times acted upon their beliefs. That's what the book of, or the Hall of Faith is all about in Hebrews chapter 11. Abraham believed and then he moved. Moses believed and then he left the palace, right? Well, he was kind of chased out, but he also said that he would rather spend time with his people than to suffer sin for a season in the palace with the Pharaoh, right? People acted upon their faith. They didn't sit down with it and listen to a story every week. That's not action. That's inaction. So you have to say in your life, what action have you done? What deed, what movement have you made towards his truth? And in real life works. People don't understand that the book of Acts is the book of works. An act is a work. And so that's what I really wanted to discuss here, the books, right? So when men of faith began to experience faith, not only did they experience it, they also wrote it down and had scribes to write things down. And so part of the reason that we know that the Bible is for real, is because the sentiment of the scripture is 2,000 years long. So if you look at Moses, during the time of Moses, and we attribute the 5 books of of the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, to Moses. And people have, posed opposite opinions on that, but the truth of it is that we can connect it to the time of Egypt. Whoever these people were that wrote the Bible, specifically the Torah, and let me just go ahead and get to what this video is really talking about, because we're here at 10 minutes already and we haven't gotten to the subject of the video. So what I'm trying to express to you guys is that the Bible itself is proof of Elohim. The Bible itself is proof of Elohim. And let's start with Moses, because Moses is the one who is credited with writing the very oldest books in the Bible. We're talking about the book of Job, and we're also talking about the 5 books of the Torah. And so how do we know that Moses wrote these books? Because you'll have so many different scholarly opinions on this fact. You even have a complete thesis, which has been accepted by most scholarly biblical uh, um, scholars called and I can't remember the name of this method, but what it does is it breaks down the Torah into all of these different authors, right? You've got the Deuteronomist, you've got the Yahwist, you've got the Elohist, I believe. There's like 4 different authors that they attribute to the writing of the Bible and the Torah, right? And so when you hear this, you're thinking 5 different authors. So okay, well, Moses couldn't have wrote it. It means the Bible must not be true, right? But what they don't tell you is that when you look at the text does appear to address different entities. Because you have in chapter 1, uh, Elohim being used, the term Elohim. And that's why they have Elohist, right? That whole genre supposedly of writers wrote chapter 1. And then when you get to chapter 2, you have Yah being spoken of. What you guys would see in the text as the Lord. So they're saying that because there's different entities apparently being addressed in these 2 instances, that means there must be a different handwriting associated with it. And then we also know at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses dies. So we know for a fact that he couldn't have written that part. So yes, that is true, that at the end of Deuteronomy, the stuff that's talking about Moses' death did not come from Moses. So we understand that. And so let's go back and take a look at why we know that Moses did write the previous parts where he's not dead in. Because you would say, oh, okay, well, if at the end of this book he dies, and it's written that he dies as a part of the book, then he couldn't have wrote the book. But that's not true. So let's get an understanding of why. So let's look at the Hebrew in the Bible, right? The Hebrew in the Torah. What you'll find in the Hebrew in the Torah, which you won't find in any other place in the Bible. Well, in some instances these words carry on, but most frequently in the Torah, you find Egyptian words. You find Egyptian sayings. You find Egyptian culture in the Hebrew. Like not as in describing Egyptian culture, but the culture itself. Like Egyptian words spelled in Hebrew. We know this because we have plenty of Egyptian documents and plenty of vocabulary from ancient Egypt around the time that Moses and the Hebrews would be there. And I can give you a specific, and what you want to do is you want to look up, I believe the writer's name is Emmanuel Tav. And what he does is he goes through and qualifies the Bible. He says, okay, well, this did come from this era because we see that in the writing, there's elements that only someone who was living in an Egyptian culture would be able to recreate. And they're recreating it in Hebrew along with other Hebrew words, almost like if you are in, if you're in Mexico or in Spain, in a Spanish-speaking country, and you are incorporating, English words into your Spanish that you have grown up with, right? So you're Spanish, or Spanish speaking, but you live, let's just say, in America. And so when you're around all of your Spanish friends and family, you speak Spanish, but then a word will come out that you can tell is an English word or an English sounding word, like computadora, right? That's just a computer, right? That's the Spanish way to say computer. Those things are found in the Bible for Hebrews and Egyptians, in the Torah specifically. That proves that the writers of the Bible, the writer of the Torah, specifically, I'm sorry I keep saying Bible, I mean Torah in this instance, that the writer of the Torah came from an era where they were engulfed, encompassed in Egyptian society. It's so prevalent in the Hebrew, in the Torah, that it must have been written by Hebrews living in Egypt. And not modern Egypt or even Messiah's era Egypt, but ancient Egypt, because we have ancient Egyptian words, and then you have, like, you know, Messiah era Egyptian, and then you have later on Demotic and Greek and all of these other languages, but ancient Egypt, ancient Egyptians. So one of the examples was the way that Pharaoh ate his food, like he was eating his food. It's either Pharaoh, maybe it was Joseph. When he was eating, he was kissing the food. And I think the word is actually nashek, right? And so when Egyptians describe eating food, they describe it as a kiss. And the Bible uses this Egyptian word to describe how Joseph was eating his food, like he was kissing it. Do you understand what I'm saying? These signs would not be evident to the person reading it in English, right? They wouldn't be evident to someone just looking at the Hebrew. You have to also know that Egyptian matches very closely with Hebrew. You have to also know that a lot of the Egyptian characters are one for one with Hebrew characters as far as sounds. There's a Badge, author Badge or Budge or Bulge the third, who did a study on ancient Egyptian. And what he decided to do for some reason was compare it to other Semitic, or they're not Semitic, but compare it to Semitic languages in the region from that era. And he found that a lot of the letters for ancient Hebrew, the alphabet, the ancient Hebrew alphabet, were also in Egyptian, but they were used as pictographs, or different pictographs, because Hebrew is a pictographic language too. So this is an evidence for the Torah being written in ancient Egypt by Hebrews. I mean, that's not just evidence, it's overwhelming evidence. And it's overwhelming evidence because it's not apparent. Does that make sense? It's overwhelming evidence because it's not apparent. It's something that you have to dig for. Whereas the stuff that's given to you is attempting to debunk it. Do you see how even if different entities are addressed in the text, and so you're saying, okay, well, there's different writers, that doesn't mean that if you have ancient Egyptian littered through the text as a lifestyle. It means nothing. You know that the text comes from a culture that was both Hebrew and Egyptian. And so that continues. That is not the only place where this hallmark of the text appears. And so it actually appears all through the text. So when you go to any era of the writings, you see the language change. Go to the book of Daniel. So you understand that the book of Daniel begins with the Babylonian captivity. And so if you know anything about the Babylonian captivity, you know that the Babylonians spoke Aramaic, right? You know that the Babylonians spoke Aramaic. And Aramaic is a language that existed alongside Hebrew all the way since ancient times, before, of course, their captivity. But you don't find it as much in the text until you get to a certain point in the text. In the book of Daniel, you find Aramaic completely. That the book of Daniel, the first chapter, is written in Hebrew, but the second chapter, starting at verse, I believe 8, maybe 11, is the part where he says, and he spoke to the king, or the I believe the servant spoke to the king. No, 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 no. I can't remember exactly where it starts, but it's one of the it's one of the it's the dream, right? And so it's one of um, the servants speaking to the king, and he's speaking to the king here in Aramaic, right? And I probably need to check that. That might not be correct right there, but I do know he starts in Aramaic at that point in Daniel chapter 2, around verse 8, 9, maybe it's 11. And then it continues in Aramaic, completely in Aramaic, all the way up to the 8th chapter. And then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the 9th chapter starts back up in Hebrew. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's accurate. I know that chapter 9 is in Hebrew, and going forward, that's in Hebrew. I'm thinking chapter 8 is the last Aramaic chapter in Daniel. But that makes sense, right? Because chapter 4 is written by Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar is not going to write it in Hebrew. Nebuchadnezzar is a Babylonian, right? Chapter 4 of the Bible is written by Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 4 of the book of Daniel is written by Nebuchadnezzar, who enslaved Daniel and also destroyed the temple, Yah's temple. And he's got a book in the Bible. He's got a chapter in the Bible. Do you see what I'm saying? And not only does he have a chapter in the Bible, it's in his own language. It shouldn't be there unless the story is accurate. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so these are major, major, major proofs of the Bible. Major proofs that the Bible is real, is accurate, is prophetic. All of these things. And so another way, an equally as important way to understand that this Bible is real and true, is that the same sentiment, and I started to get into this earlier, but I never finished. The same sentiment is expressed through the entire thing. So you have the same story in Genesis that you have in Revelation. And we know for a fact that Genesis was written in the Egyptian period of the Hebrew history, which is about 14 to 1500 BC. And we know for a fact that Revelation was written in the 1st century AD. That's around, they say around 90 AD is when the book of Revelation was written, based on the places, the terms, the understandings, and then John himself, John the Revelator. And so we know some of the history of John. We know he was banished to the island of Patmos. We know the Pharaoh, the Caesar that used to do this. And I can't remember which Caesar right now, if it's Nero or one of Claudius or one of those guys. But we know around 90 AD is when this began to occur. And we have the records for that. So again, the book of Revelation says most of the same stuff as all the previous books before it. The sentiment of the Messiah, the sentiment of the children of Israel, the sentiment of the concept of slavery versus freedom, the sentiment in the text, the importance of the prophet, the idea of the prophet, the idea of the dream, the vision, the same ideas themselves carried on from the book of Genesis all the way to the book of Revelation, and not diverting in any way. The same thought process, as if written by the same author, because it was written by the Spirit. And that's why the same sentiment goes forth all the way from beginning to end. A historical fact that 1,500 years of writers wrote the same story. 25 generations of the same family wrote this story. And in every era, they wrote it in the languages of their captors. If we Hebrews Black Americans today were to write a story about our captivity, what language would we write it in? Would it be in Hebrew? It'd be in the language of our captors. Do you understand that the story is still being written, still being lived? This is why we know the Bible is true. This is why we understand that the Bible is true. You even have the whole New Testament written in Greek. The entire New Testament written in Greek. Those were the people that held us captive during that time. Greeks and the Romans. Romans spoke Greek and Latin. Greek was the prima franca around the 1st century. You see how language proves era? Because if you spoke a bunch of English and there was a bunch of English speakers, you'd be in this era. If there was a bunch of Muslim people and Arabic speakers, you would be in this era. A bunch of French speakers, this era. Do you understand? A bunch of Spanish speakers in this particular era. Because these were the people that conquered a lot of the world during this particular time. And that actually proves what era you're in. Does that make sense? And not only that, the same thought process goes through the whole thing and changes languages as the eras progress. That's one story. It's one story. Starting with Moses. And that in itself is a miracle. Because what other book have you seen that has taken 1,500 years, 25 generations to write, and it's the same story over and over and over again? It's like the book of Judges. Captivity, freedom, captivity, moaning and groaning, Messiah, freedom. Captivity, wickedness, Messiah dies, wickedness, captivity. Okay, this is the cycle. Captivity, moaning and groaning, Messiah, deliverance, freedom, Messiah dies, return to wickedness, return to captivity, return to moaning and groaning, Messiah comes, deliverance, freedom, Messiah dies, return to wickedness, return to captivity. Do you understand? That's the book of Judges. You had 7 Messiahs in the book of Judges, and they're called Mashiachs in the book of Judges, deliverers. So you can apply that to the entire history of Israel, all the way up until today, the American captivity. Okay, you guys, we're right at 30 minutes. Let me go ahead and stop this. This was supposed to be Theory of Everything 16, qualifying the Bible, again, with Moses and his book, starting the biblical authorship, and then going on down all the way to the present day, being a testimony in itself of the accuracy of the Bible. And then also seeing, as the eras progress, the significant hallmarks of cultural continuation, of a real story through different cultures, even as this people began to be enslaved every time it broke the rules. Whoa. Okay, you guys. Shabbat shalom.